I recently saw Neo Soul trending on YouTube, so I'm going to show you guys how to make a Neo Soul track. We're going to go over chords, voice leading, and really cool techniques in FL Studio you can use to make your chords sound way more realistic. Let's hop straight into it. All right, so if you don't know gospel musicians, they're the first people I've ever seen make Neo Soul sound impeccable. So firstly, that is the standard and the definition of Neo Soul. Their stuff is just impeccable. Gospel musicians, start there. Now, as far as if you're on FL Studio, let's get rocking. We're going to use Keyscape for this. Now, here's some chord types we're going to go over today. It's really based in chords, this neo soul vibe, and understanding dominant chords. I used to overlook dominant chords all the time. I'd be like, I don't like the sound of that chord. It's because I didn't know how to use it at the time. So this is the genre that loves a Rhodes piano. And we're going to look at 7th chords, 9th chords, 11th chords, 13th chords, major 9th chords, dominant 11th chords, the dominant 9th chords, how to alter those chords, how to create suspended chords. And I'm going to give you a chord progression to start off. A lot to cover. So let's just start. Neo Soul comes down to the chords. Firstly, let's go to a boom bappy BPM, like 93-ish. Okay, it's a nice little start. Okay, so firstly, they usually have tremolo on their E-piano. So it pans to the left and right. It just keeps the ear engaged on the chord. Very specific part of the sound. Doesn't need to be there, but that's usually how it's set up. All right, so firstly, let's build out what's called a 7th chord. We're going to start with the C major scale, which is all the white notes starting from C, and then I'll show you how to make a 7th chord. 7th chords, most people voice them normally, and I'm going to give you guys a tip today on how to voice your 7th chord so that they don't sound so just kind of bland. Not that everything is bland, but okay, so here's C major. It's all the white notes starting from C. So the reason I'm using this because this is a major scale, which is the most common scale you'll see next to a minor scale, natural minor. So how do you make chords? You start at the root note, or any note technically. These are all scale degrees, they're called. In this case, we're going to start at the root note. You don't have to start chord progressions at the root note. Okay, so we're going to start at the root note for this one, skip every other note going up the scale. So C, skip D, go to E, skip F, go to G, skip A, go to B. These 4 notes create what's called a 7th chord. Why is it called the 7th? Because C is the first C is the first scale degree, D is the second scale degree, E is the third, F is the 4th, G is the 5th, A is the 6th, B is the 7th. So when you map a chord out until it's called a chord extensions, until it extends all the way up to the 7th, we call that the 7th, because we're playing all the notes going up to the 7th scale degree. That's how it gets the name. So firstly, for this style, we're going to lower the velocity because it creates a softer, more intimate type of vibe. So that's the first step I see a lot of people mistake with, Rhodes, is they play it way too hard and it becomes bitey. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Like that's a bitey, that's more for like funk. You want to play very softly to trigger this, what's called articulation. Okay, so we have a C major 7th chord. Now you may ask, where do we go next? Instead of asking, where do you go next? Just have ways to go about moving through chords. Now, the main thing I'm going to cover today is called a dominant chord. So a dominant chord, you've overlooked it so many times. The dominant chord is going to be the 5th scale degree. So 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Now, when I'm speaking about scale degrees, we're speaking about notes specifically in a scale, not just 5 notes away. The 5th is 7 notes away from the root note technically, but this is the 5th scale degree. Now, if we build a chord starting at G, skipping those notes, so G, skip A, go to B, skip C, go to D, skip E, go to F, that will be it's called a dominant 7th. Why is it called a dominant 7th? Because you have a diminished chord right here. And so a dominant 7th composes of 2 chords, your major chord and your minor chord, minor 7th. So once you study chord codes at busyworksbeats.com/music theory, this will all make sense because there's a DNA to each chord. I call it chord codes. Okay, so right here, the DNA for this chord is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 0, 4, 7 always makes the major chord no matter where you are on the keyboard. And the 10 up here comes from 0, 3, 7, 10, which is a minor 7th. So basically you have a major triad with a minor 7th on top, and it's a major and minor chord combined, and that creates this diminished chord here, which creates that pull effect. Now, most people voice it like this, and I'll show you how to voice it way differently. So usually dominant chords want to resolve back to what's called the tonic. So this is a quick way to, even if you don't know what chord to put before your next chord, you could use dominant chords, even if you're in a whole different key. It always wants to resolve back to the tonic. Okay, so that's a great way to incorporate this. Now let's go back and let's get a little more complex. Now I know I'm moving into advanced music theory, but we covered this in Music Theory Magic. Just go to busyworksbeats.com/music theory magic. I'll leave a link below if I remember. Because in this course, I go over the real esoteric stuff behind all this. You have to trigger emotions. There's different voicing techniques. What we'll do here is we'll add A and B to extend this chord type. Actually, we're just going to make this a dominant ninth chord. And then we're going to use what's called a tritone substitution. So now we're going to hit shift down 6 times. 1, 2, whoops, let's start over. 1, fingers getting stuck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Why is this important? Because of this half step movement downward. Okay, when you're going down, it feels sad. When you go up, it feels happy. Now, in Neo Soul, you're going to see a lot of these half steps going from one note directly to the note above or below. Now, usually when we're in chord progressions, we don't play tonic, fifth tonic, but I'll play it for you. And it always resolves. So you can literally play those 2 chords back to back to back to do this push-pull effect. Now, let's get into a little more complicated of a science here. We're going to get into 2-5-1, which is very common. So 2 meaning, I got to be careful how I say stuff. Second is technically what it is, a second scale degree, not the 2, but people get lazy and they call it 2. Okay, so technically it's the second scale degree. And that's important for many reasons later. So D, skip E, go to F, skip G, go to A, skip B, go to C. And that creates our second, I'll say, or 2 in some people's case. Okay, so now we're creating a chord from one note in the scale. Okay, so that 2-5-1 is extremely common in gospel. Now I'm going to show you how to level this up. Okay, so firstly, let's make these chords bigger. It doesn't mean always that bigger chords always sound better. Sometimes you can make a chord too big and it loses its thing. Okay, same way you can make a chord too small and it doesn't have enough vibe. So let's make these chords bigger. So this is D minor ninth. We have a dominant ninth chord, and then we have a C major ninth. You've seen this in other videos, and I've shown you this before, but let's move it to the next level, which is called altering a chord. So for dominant chords, the cool thing about it is you can take the 5th and the 9th and move these notes around any way you want. You can pull them up, you can pull them down. That's called flattening the notes if you pull them down. You're sharpening the notes if you pull them up. It creates more of an R&B vibe when you pull them up. Now, Neo Soul is also a playing style. I've noticed a lot of strumming in their genre. So let's add Alt-S in FL Studio. Now you heard that drink. That's because these notes overlap. So we're just going to highlight these, hit Alt-L, or grab your slice tool, hit Shift, right-click, and make sure those notes don't overlap. So we have a duplicate note there. Okay, so now you have more of an intimate type of vibe. And this goes for R&B as well. So this technique is not exclusive to Neo Soul. All right, now let's create a chord progression from scratch. We're going to use the C major scale, which is all the white notes starting from C. To make our first chord, we're going to start at C and skip every other note within this scale. Okay, so we're going to C, skip D, go to E, skip F, go to G, skip A, go to B, skip C, go to D. This creates a ninth chord. The reason it's called a ninth chord is because you're going up to what's called the ninth scale degree. So in this case, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. Okay, that's why it's called the ninth, because we're playing all those notes, skipping those notes until it gets to the ninth note. And then the type of chord is a major chord. So that's why it's called C major ninth. All right. So some people ask, what is the next chord to go to? There is no science. Now, there is intervallic resolution, which we teach in Music Theory Magic at busyworksbeats.com/music theory magic. There's also a certain direction that chords tend to want to move. It doesn't mean you have to move that way. There's just chords that want to follow other chords naturally. And that's based on intervallic resolution. We don't need to get so complicated. For this technique, let's just take the same chord type and pull it down 4 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 half steps, I should say. And for this chord, we're going to actually take the 3rd and the 5th and pull it up an octave. The reason this is going to sound cool is because we have this half step. And it creates that jump in energy. It gives you that Tyler, the Creator type vibe. And now my ear wants to hear this C. So this is where I stop worrying about the scale and I just go based off of what my ear wants to hear next. Remember, your ear is listening to the intervallic resolution. So when people say they play by ear, they're referring to the jumps in the top notes most of the time. Intervallic resolution. And then I have to ask, does this chord sound right? It sounds right, but it could be better. So let's convert this to a minor chord by taking the 3rd and 7th and pulling it down 1. That sounds worse than before. So this sounds cool. It just probably needs a different voicing. I don't like how it goes down. So instead, we're going to add that note. And I'm going to extend this out, it's called, by just adding the next layer. So you don't need to like memorize everything I'm doing here because there's no science to it. Here you have a major chord. Here you have a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So technically you have the minor 3rd, and then you have the major 3rd down here. And this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is a perfect 4th. Adding on top just to add color to it. So I call that a color tone more than a chord note, even though technically it is part of the chord. And that makes this part melodic. Okay, so now our ear is starting to listen to the note jumps between the top notes. That makes it melodic. So once you get into really deep chord extensions like this 6-note chord, the top note is more of a melody than it is part of the harmony, I'll say. That's not a rule. It's just something I've observed over time. Okay, and now we're gonna go. Dun. So what I wanna do is introduce a 9th chord. Now let's see how we can incorporate the E note in here. So firstly, the 9th chord, the dominant chord is gonna start at G, okay? And if you build out the dominant chord, you don't see the E. So what can we do? We can transpose this down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we were 1 step away from that E. One half step, I should say. Now, because this is a dominant chord, you can alter a dominant chord. And so because we have a lot of notes, we can move stuff around. So usually it's the 5th and the 9th. So I'm going to raise what's called the 9th up 1 to get to that E. Let's also raise the 5th to see. I think raising the 5th kind of makes it too. Now, another technique you could do, I like that chord, but let's try another technique, is to add a dominant 11th chord. We're going to start at G in this case, just so you understand where it's coming from. So this is the dominant, or the 5th of the scale, the dominant chord. Okay, so we're going to pull this down 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And something we could do is omit the notes in here because it's a very big chord. So let's omit the 3rd and the 5th and just see what this melodic structure sounds like. That's giving me like a. I forget what song it is, but it's triggering my memory on a certain song. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Okay, and then you could also add those notes back so you know where you are. So this is the 3rd and the 5th, 7th, 9th. So because we are removing the 5th, we can remove the 3rd and still have the chord identity because you have the 7th. But let's sharpen the 5th and 9th, and then we'll flatten it to see what it sounds like. That was cool. It's a very tense sound. Let's pull it. Now we're flattening the 5th and 9th. That adds a vibe, but for this one, we don't need the 5th. Okay, so we're playing like chords straight out. So let me show you how to harmonize it. Excuse me, how to humanize. Go to your tools in FL Studio, go to humanize, mess with the velocity offset and the, where is it at? The duration range and duration offset and the starting time offset. Okay, because that will create a more natural type of vibe. So let's do that, accept. And we're gonna make sure any overlapping notes, we hit shift and right click to make sure that we're not overlapping the notes in FL. Okay, so here's the fun part where you can add the notes that kind of jump from one chord to another. This is up to you at this point. And this is going to add that professional type of sound, okay, as if we're really playing the keys. Another technique is the slide note, so we can go from one note directly to the note above or below. It's usually one note above or two notes above. Now this half step wants to resolve down, but we already have that note playing, so we have to decide how we're going to resolve that last note. Okay, now let's slow it down to a realistic BPM. Okay, so at this point, you just add drums behind it and a bass line. Now, if you struggle with bass lines, just take your bottom notes of all your chords and just copy that into the bass. Pretty simple. And then you could jump to fourths, fifths, octaves, just bounce around the bass a little bit. But the drums are pretty straightforward. Now, what we're going to do, since we wrote in C major, it's a pretty basic scale. So now we're going to move it to different scales, hitting shift up and shift down. So I'm debating if I want these top notes in here. Okay, so another thing you could do is hit Alt S to strum the chords so that you're playing them, from bottom to top. So in FL, you got to be careful with this because if everything is strummed the same, it just sounds computerized. So now we're getting that vibe. Just got to make sure notes don't overlap. Okay, so now all we're going to do is shift keys, hitting shift up and shift down. Just try different keys, even starting at the black notes. We're going to go down an octave. Okay, now let's move into a different chord progression. We're going to start here off C major 7. I'm not going to map out the chord reference just to save time here. So it's C, E, G, B. That's the major 7th. We're going to move into a B. Now, the reason we're moving into this chord is called a secondary dominant chord. So let me show you something. So if you want to move from C major 7th into, let's say, E minor 9th, which is part of the C major scale, except this F sharp. Okay, so let's say you want to move from that chord to this chord. The question is, how do you move from here to here? You can use what are called secondary dominants. So in this case, we're going to use a dominant 9th chord, and you have to go to the 5th of the chord you want to land at. So for example, E minor 9th's 5th is B. So we're going to make a dominant chord starting at B, Now you can revoice it using tritone substitution or leave it as is. Okay, but it always resolves down to B. Or you could just revoice these notes. Let's pull it down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, it's the half step movement that creates this nice vibe. And it feels natural. Also, you could take this top note, pull it down. Or these top two notes. Now it feels more cohesive because we're not jumping all around for these chords. So now we're getting a little advanced. I'm moving a little quickly here because, we're moving into the advanced stuff. But again, I go step by step and a lot more thorough in our Music Theory Magic course. Just go to busyworksbeats.com/music theory magic. I'll guide you through really cool music theory stuff. So we have the E minor ninth, and then we're going to move to D minor ninth. Let's just use a chord stamp. Okay, so usually when I hear a tone, I look for that note in the top note of a chord. And let's flip these down. So we went from D minor. I don't know how I got to C. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do the same technique, going from the dominant chord down to the tonic. So right now we're doing tonic, and then we're doing secondary dominant into E minor ninth. That's the tonic of that specific dominant chord. Then we're doing a 2 from the C major scale, and then we're going to go 5, 1, back to the beginning. So this is where we're going to add a dominant chord. You don't need to memorize. I know I'm kind of going advanced here, but you don't need to memorize everything I'm saying. Okay, so here's the G. Now we're going to use the 7th version, and then we're going to do what's called sharpening our 5th so that it's not this diminished chord right here. Okay, and then we resolve back to the tonic. So you have the dominant chord moving back to the tonic. So it's all about understanding dominant chords. I used to overlook dominant chords all the time because I'm like, who would ever play a dominant chord? Who would play diminished? But now I understand that these are the chords that always resolve back to the tonic. So even if you're picking a chord type and you don't know what chord to add in between, you could add that secondary dominant, it's called, which is the dominant of the chord you're trying to land on. So in this case, let's do C major 7th. We're going to do the B. Did we do B? Where's our... Oh, I did the tritone substitution here. Into E. Now what I'm going to introduce here, I want to switch it up. Okay. And let's do, after E, let's do our D minor 11th. So this one is a very big chord. I'm also going to show you, I'm not going to give away the answer, but I'll go by ear and make a chord progression using minor 11th chords. Now this chord is very big, so you got to play it in certain ways so that it sounds more natural. Now this jump here from this chord to this chord, let's revoice this. Also, let's use the 9th. In a tritone substitution, so we're going 2, 5, 1 down. I'm going to raise that 9th. Okay, so let's pull it up an octave just to see what. And let's add that strum. Actually, before strum, let's do humanize so that we get all the velocity differences. We're going to make sure no overlapping notes. This is an FL Studio function. If you're in other DAWs, you don't need to worry about this. But in FL, if the notes overlap, they mute. So we need to make sure they're not overlapping. Quickly do this by hitting Shift and then right click with your slice tool. So that's a quick way to make sure stuff's not overlapping. Now let's add the strum, Alt S. I'm going to exaggerate this. Now, because we already humanized, the notes aren't strumming the same exact way. Now that chord, I wanted that same vibe, but this is a different ending. Okay, let's see if we can exaggerate some of this tremolo effect. Add some chorusing for a vibe. And we didn't go over suspended chords, so let's try to add in a suspended chord. So a suspended chord usually comes towards the end of something. Like if you wanted another chord in here, but you didn't know which chord to add, you could add a suspended chord. Simply just taking your third, flattening it down for a minor chord. If it's a major chord, you would pull that third down too, and that would be your suspended. It's a very simple way to kind of feel the same, but be different. Okay, so at this point, you're just gonna add drums. All right, so when you add drums, it adds somewhat of a vibe. Now we're also gonna do another chord progression using minor 11th chords. Okay, so now let's create another. Now this is the last lesson for today. Okay, so we're gonna make minor 11th chords all the way down. And we're just transposing, listening to that top note. You've heard this before. Now it's a different chord at the end, technically, in the real song. Okay, now we can switch the key. Okay, this is Floetry Say Yes, the chord progression. It's basically just minor 11th chords all the way down. Pretty simple. Okay, so you could do chord transposition that way as well. So the drums will change up for this vibe. Okay, so again, you could transpose the key, hitting shift up or down. So Neo Soul comes down to chord extensions and understanding the secondary dominant and dominant chords that lead back to the tonic. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more, go to busyworksbeats.com/music theory magic. That's our new course on music theory. It goes over much deeper concepts, and I guide you step by step through all this. Thank you for watching. It's Game from busyworksbeats.com.